People only come to crypto right now to make money, so you need to appeal to that particular use case. If that model is owned by a single party or a single person, then you're now under the assumptions and objectives of that individual and person, right? And that's why it's so important to potentially decentralize that ownership.
I want to understand the entire AI stack from you.
Think of a model as like a really intricate designed chip or a dam where you are about to allow water to flow through. It's ironic, we talk about growing the pie, but no one actually wants to grow the pie. That is the golden question that no one has been able to answer. And I think if anyone gives you a straight answer to that, Saurabh, they're lying.
Welcome to the DCo Podcast, where we bring you stories from founders and investors in Web3. Before we get started, this is not a financial or legal advice. It's just a conversation about things we find interesting in Web3. Views expressed are our own personal opinions. DCo members or guests appearing on the show may have positions on assets they talk about. All right. Welcome to another episode. Today we have Ejaaz with us. I have been following Ejaaz for quite some time, and his takes on AI, how deep he is into AI, his episodes with Bankless as co-host on AI Weekly Rollup, and he's also a co-founder of Aiccelerate DAO. So I'm looking forward to this one. Welcome to the show, Ejaaz.
Thanks for having me, Saurabh. Really looking forward to this one.
All right. So let's start big, pretty zoomed out view. I want to understand the entire AI stack from you, right? I mean, you've been in the so-called trenches for a while. So make me understand the entire stack, right from GPU marketplaces to training to inferences to agents and agent marketplaces, while explaining every stack as to what unique problems that crypto solves at every layer. And, does crypto need to be there in every layer? I mean, should we be present across the layers, or there are certain layers that we should be optimizing for?
Yeah. Really good question. So I'll get into it. So the way I kind of view the stack as you described it would be at the bottom of this layer, you kind of have what I call AI resources. So these are like, the minerals and the soil and the earth that you need to kind of build the foundations of a building, for example, right? So what are these things? You have data, you have compute, and then you have the model themselves, right? So think of a model as like a really intricate designed chip or a dam where you are about to allow water to flow through, right? You need to design it very precariously. You need to make sure that it's, set up in a way that will allow, intelligence to blossom from it, right? But a model in itself isn't very useful, right? So you need to feed it certain things in order for it to function. Similar to water flowing through a dam, you're not going to generate electricity, right? So what are those things? It's data and it's compute. And so if we start off from this bottom stack, your question is like, how can crypto help here? Well, on the data side of things, most data or most valuable data is siloed. Where is it siloed? It's siloed with all your top social media platforms that you use every day. It's siloed with your hospital medical provider and all these different things. And this kind of like drives back to a very old adage within crypto and blockchain, which is, you don't actually own any of your data, right? And blockchain's kind of like help kind of like take that leap amongst like owning your data, whether that's as an asset or a token on a blockchain, or whether that's via encryption through ZK encryption and many other things, right? So that's how crypto can help on the data side of things. It can help aggregate, crypto is very good at coordinating individuals. So if you were to coordinate a bunch of individuals to aggregate certain bits of data so that you can pull it together and you can have a very valuable resource that you can then feed through a model, that could be really useful. And there's a few examples of teams doing this. You have Grass Protocol, which has been kind of like scraping the web for a while. And then you've got another kind of like perspective or approach to that is Varna, right? Which is trying to tap into the personalized data side of things. And then another team could be Masa, it's a subnet on Bittensor, which, are taking another approach. But the point is, there are various different ways that crypto can help to get this data, this valuable data. On the compute side of things, think of this as like the electricity that is needed to allow your laptop or your terminal or your phone to work in the first place, right? Currently, the way that the Web 2 way to do it is to, tap into a cloud provider like AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud, etc., right? But there's a few kind of like concerns that comes around with this. Number one is centralization, right? So what if AWS decides to shut off your cluster or server or whatever that might be, right? Suddenly your model won't work anymore. You're reliant and you're dependent on them, right? So that's why if you were to create a decentralized physical infrastructure network, or DePIN for short, you could kind of like coordinate all this compute around a specific thing, which is like maybe to provide enough compute to train a model, or enough compute to inference, or to allow a model to inference. And inference, for those who are listening that don't know what that means, it's like querying basically. So when you type into ChatGPT, hey, can you give me an answer to this? ChatGPT queries the OpenAI model, right? It says, hey, like this is the question this person asked, right? So that's on the compute side. And I think crypto networks can do a really good way of coordinating compute. Examples of this could be, I don't know, IONET, Render, Prime Intellect on the training side, Noose Research on the training side. There's plenty of examples of these kind of companies, teams, or infrastructures existing. Then on the third point around this, again, we're still on the fundamental layer. There's a lot to go through, right? Are the models themselves. Now, the models are the trickiest because typically you need a lot of research, AI and ML expertise, and just like a way to kind of like test these things out. And it's quite expensive to do, Sarab, if I'm being honest, right? But we're seeing kind of like open models kind of emerge. Probably the most famous and most recent one is this model called DeepSeek, which came out of a Chinese team, essentially, and they decided to open source this. Another example is Llama, which is a famous open source AI model, which came from the guys at Meta. So the reason why open models are really important, it's a few reasons. Number one, you're able to see how it's designed, so you can make sure that it's not biased or censored in a certain way that might implicate or, extract from the user, the person that's using it. Like an example I always go to here is like, imagine you're using a model and it's swaying you towards certain political beliefs that aren't necessarily true, or it's feeding you misinformation on the data that it's trained of. It's really important to know how that model is designed. Secondly, if that model is owned by a single party or a single person, then you're now under the assumptions and objectives of that individual and person, right? And that's why it's so important to potentially decentralize that ownership for that particular model, right? So I call that kind of like the fundamental, the base layer, right? Now, moving up, it gets kind of easier to understand. The way I say it is, it gets sexier. It gets, less boring, right? So if you move up above that, you have something that I call the coordination layer. And this is where crypto kind of really shines. So if you think about this, you have the compute, you have the data, you have all the models. How do you know which one to hit at what time? And how do you know like which player within each one to hit at what time? It's kind of hard to figure out, right? So if you had something like a coordination layer, which can help, route every single request that comes top down saying, hey, like I need an AI to help me, give me a recipe to cook for dinner tonight, or I need an AI to help sort my taxes out or whatever. It can route everything to the right model and use the right data and compute, etc. It can get better and better and better iterative loops, right? The best example of this is probably BitTensor, or a network called Allora, which currently just like helps route a bunch of these things, and they control compute. They have subnets, or when I say a subnet, I'm describing like an app or a team to help with data and all these different kinds of things. So that's the coordination layer that sits just above the kind of like resource layer. But really, the coordination layer hits across everywhere in the stack, but I'll get to that in a second. Above that, in my opinion, you have something called the middleware layer. Now, the middleware layer is kind of like the most Web 2 component of this, and how it decentralizes and whether it needs crypto is a big question mark for me, right? So, the things that would exist in this middleware layer are things like AI agent frameworks that we've seen from the likes of AI16Z, Arc, Virtuals. And the reason or purpose for these frameworks is an open source way or toolkit for people to build the application layer. And I'll get to the application layer in a second. But the reason why you need this middleware layer is all the kind of like stuff that happens in the back end of these applications. So we're talking about memory architecture of these agents. We're talking about data repositories. What kind of databases do we use? How do we query them, etc. And that sits at the middleware layer. Now, whether this needs crypto is a big question mark for me, to be honest. I'm trying to figure it out. You would argue that if you wanted to create a fully decentralized application, all the cypherpunks in the world would be like, yeah, like it has to be decentralized. How effective that is, I actually don't know. So it's something that I'm exploring myself right now. And finally, at the top of the stack, you have the application layer, which in my opinion will materialize in the form of not traditional apps, not traditional websites, but these things called agents. And the way I would describe an agent is kind of like an autonomous software-fueled entity that can think for itself, ingest data, and act in real time, make its own decisions, right? An agent is not something that I think is contained within a single loop. It's something that can think in an infinite loop, right? Technically or theoretically. And what I mean by this is it can think for itself very much like a human. They're digital humans. And the reason why I think the application layer will exist in the framework of agents is because in a world full of a million websites and a million apps and a million bits of data artifacts, you need a much newer interface to interface with all of these things. And I think just one terminal where I can kind of talk to it, speak to it, or even like look or point in a certain direction, or better yet, it reads my mind, makes sense. So hopefully that makes sense. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot for that explanation. I really love it. Now, while thinking of these different layers, pretty sure that different layers have different value accruals, right? And therefore, different business models, right? One of the examples that comes very quickly to my mind is virtuals, right? When things were going all right, they were making enough fees, and we did not rely too much on inflationary token supply or those things, right? I mean, the application itself or the protocol or the framework itself was generating revenue to sustain itself, right? What are the examples or what are the business models of every layer? And have we seen early evidences of, okay, like this is the business model towards which like everyone is kind of gravitating along all layers?
Mm. Yeah, I think that that is the golden question that no one has been able to answer. And I think if anyone gives you a straight answer to that, Saurabh, they're lying. And the reason why I say this is I think the crypto business model has only been figured out for a few things. And I mean, really few things. You could argue that it's a monetary asset, which is Bitcoin, right? And, you get emissions from that. And, eventually, once that emission schedule declines exponentially, as it were, you're hoping that fees on the Bitcoin network will be worthy enough for miners to do that thing, right? Or for people to transact and run nodes and validators. So that's one thing. The other thing is stable coins, right? It's stable coins is like, okay, cool, we'll take just a fee. It's like kind of like the Visa model in a way. And in fact, Visa actually makes, a decent chunk of money off of fees from that. But I think when it comes to the AI stack, you can look at it in similar ways. So let's kind of like approach this. Well, let's look at the bottom layer of the stack and let's look at the top layer of the stack because there's two arguments for each one, right?
Right.
On the bottom layer of the stack, where it comes at the infra layer, you're kind of betting that the layers above it, so the coordination network, the middleware network, and the app layer are all paying some cost or fee back to that network, right? So it's like, okay, we're going to distill these components down to the most valuable things: compute, data, and models. Everyone's going to need it. And maybe I make all my money from inference costs or training costs that are fed down to me. And the reason why I say inference and training is at the end of the day, what this stack has that's most valuable is the model itself, right? So if you're training a model, you need to pay the compute providers and the data providers. And maybe that's just like through their own token, right? And maybe it's just like a payments mechanism. That's what I'm seeing right now today. I don't know how useful that'll be. Another kind of model that I'm seeing is like, they pay each other or they pay for each of their resources in whatever currency, and then they buy back their token and burn it, right? But my question then becomes, what happens when these tokens kind of like reach a certain point where it like becomes inordinately expensive to use or whatever that might be? And that's an open question for a lot of crypto protocols, right? And then if you look at the top of the stack,
It's not specific to AI. I think that is valid across the board. Yeah.
100%. It's not specific to AI at all. This is a crypto problem that needs to be resolved, right? And then on the application layer, if I'm being honest, you kind of see a similar thing, right? So all the AI apps that I've seen exist today in the form of agents use some kind of staking or payment model, right? And the common example is, hey, pay to access this terminal where this agent will now give you alpha. That's AIXBT, right? Or stake a certain amount of this token and now you can get different tiered access, right? That's cool and everything. And I'm seeing like, there's potential buybacks and other agents and stuff like, I don't know, Ask Billy Bets and other stuff that aren't coming to mind right now. It's all cool. Whether it's sustainable in the future, I have no idea because most of these things aren't revenue positive yet, right? If you want to talk about revenue positive crypto apps, they're ones that either don't have a token or just had a token, right? I look at Kaito as the most obvious example, right? They're technically profitable, but they have an AI powered app versus a
Right.
crypto native AI app, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. When you were talking about this, I was thinking about how all of this is similar to blockchains themselves, right? For example, I think you have made this comparison in the past. I'm just extending that to what you said right now. So, if you look at a value chain of layer ones, to be precise, you have block producers that are pretty close to what the chain is, right? I mean, chain is a bunch of nodes where some of the nodes are proposing and building blocks. That is the one end of the value chain. And the other end of the value chain is something that is pretty close to the user, right? Which are like applications like Aave and whatnot, right? Where user interacts with on a daily or regular basis. And if you see the distribution of value in the blockchain stack, you see that the value from adjacent layers kind of starts flowing back to either the block producer or at the top of the stack with applications. What I mean by that is if you look at bridges, if you look at solvers, if you look at any of the middlemen, when there is enough competition among them, they have to bribe a block producer to make sure that their transaction or whatever they are building kind of gets included inside a block, right?
Yep.
And similarly at the top, I mean, if you look at applications like Moonshot, they are charging like a 2.5% fee for every transaction to a user, right? And users are willing to pay that because the UX is cool, right? I mean, it's not clunky, and people who probably don't interact with chains way too much or on-chain applications too much, these applications are solving some sort of a problem for users. So I don't know if something similar can emerge in the AI stack itself.
Yeah, probably. I think we're going to see a lot of this come to life. Well, actually, I was going to say soon, but I don't know how soon. I think there's a few other kinks to be worked out, especially at the middleware layer, right? That's why a lot of these agents kind of like seem or appear very similar. Another question I have with the way you just described that, Sarab, is how efficient are these things going to be compared to like the Web 2 version, right? Where it's just all contained within a single vertical stack. You know the team that's working on this stack, and you don't have a million other teams that you need to then query or talk to that are kind of anonymous, right? Or you can't, there's no support team, right? So I'm curious whether it'll actually give an advantage over Web 2 stuff. Yeah.
And one general question before we move on, okay? I mean, I also want to understand like how the layers at the bottom, I get the layers at the top, but layers at the bottom kind of compete with companies that have billions of dollars of budget.
Yes.
When it comes to, I mean, whether it is models or GPU stacks or whatever, right? I mean, how are we competing with those companies?
Yeah. So the point is like when you have many versus one, you can potentially overcome the bigger person, the bigger bet. And the thing that's kind of been a huge challenge for the compute side of things, and I'm speaking specifically for the compute side of things, is it's hard to kind of like put all these random GPUs together because, they're all different flavors. They look different, they act different. Some are older, some are younger. And you're kind of like moving at the point of your weakest man or your weakest GPU. So this guy that's like higher performing is always going to be held back by the little guy that's kind of underperforming. Designing new techniques and ways to train and allow models to be inferenced was crucial and held us back. But now with some of the advancements that we've seen from the guys at Noose Research, Prime Intellect, they're making like huge advancements. Jensen is another one. They're actually figuring out ways to train. So I'm convinced that at scale, if you have enough of these GPU clusters in a decentralized network, they could actually end up becoming really competitive. The second reason why these decentralized compute networks are super important, Sarab, is ownership. And the fact that it isn't a single cluster being owned, right? And I think that maybe philosophically and maybe in a slight way ethically is way better than the centralized version. Now, on the data side of things, here's the thing. I think data is actually one of the most important things. I don't know how that's going to get solved in a decentralized manner, if I'm being very honest with you. Like, you can scrape all the web data that you want, but there's a bunch of Web 2 companies that do that as well, right?
Exactly.
The most valuable part is the personal side of things, which is under silos, and you can't tap into that. You would need to pay for it in some way, but you're still in some way reliant on the Web 2 side of things. So I actually don't know how that's going to get resolved currently, right? Maybe if we create some form of app or social app that is so valuable that people all want to migrate there and give up their data in an open source manner, sure, but it's kind of hard, and I don't know how to wrap my head around that particular point. And yeah.
All right. Yeah. I think that's the best we can think about at the moment, right? I'm not sure whether we have pinpointed answers. But yeah, let's switch gears. Let's get a little specific. I think a month ago, I mean, because you said money and blockchains, right? In my mind, blockchains use cases in terms of whatever we do. I think when it comes to money, it's really specific, and we've seen product market fit, right? And stablecoin is a subset of that, right?
Yep.
So this is why I was looking into DeFi and where AI plays a role in DeFi, right? I mean, I don't know how to pronounce it, the DEFAI.
Call it
thing.
DeFi AI.
DeFi AI, right? I mean, that's the best way, probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was looking into it about a month ago, and I was trying like different applications and what was there available at that time. And I realized that most of the applications are clunky, right?
Yep.
Either they don't do what they claim to do, or they take an awful lot of time to do whatever we can do, right? I mean, if I were to swap and bridge and whatever, like I would do it way quicker than any DeFi AI application that is out there right now, which is fine. The whole space has been around only for a quarter or so. I can't expect like crazy level of smoothness out of them at this point, which is fine.
Yeah.
But as I understood the space, there are like 3 or 4 subcategories that I can divide it into, right? One is intelligence, of course, something like an AI XPT, right? Working relentlessly to scour through Twitter and figuring out what alpha is and whatever. Then there is curation bit, because AI XPT is also throwing like 1,000 tweets at me every day, and it's not humanly possible for me to, evaluate everything that AI XPT throws at me. And then there is execution or abstraction, whatever you want to call it. Right, something like Wayfinder, where, I don't even know, as a user, I don't know how it is bridging, what chain it is interacting with. All I see is, a swap happening or financial transaction or an exchange happening. Now, if I were to look at users in terms of concentric circles for DeFi and for crypto at large, the largest one is centralized exchange users, which are probably like 150 or whatever the number is that Coinbase tells us. And DeFi is like a tiny circle inside of it, where it is predominant with developers. Then the outside of that will probably be power users, and then there will be late on-chain users, right, who see someone talking about Trump and they go and swap maybe like once in 3 months or whatever. But if we are to expand these circles and capture more users from centralized exchanges, it needs to get easier. I get that. Right. But we also neglect the fact that centralized exchanges also perform duties of curation, right? Because the user who goes on centralized exchange doesn't have to bother about several tickers that look the same. They don't have to worry about what the correct contract address is and so many things, right? It's just way too easy, because centralized exchanges are the curators as well, along with everything else.
Sure.
So now my question is, what is happening in this stack? Where does the value accrue? Because centralized exchanges are kind of gatekeepers. They also are charging for curation, and they have that power, right? You have the power in the sense that when a token gets listed on a centralized exchange like Binance or Coinbase, you have a lot of say in what happens to that token, right? So the question is, when all of this is happening on chain with the use of AI, are there just going to be new gatekeepers who are curators and they extract value from users just as centralized exchanges do? And yeah, I mean, about abstraction and intelligence, I know there's a lot, but yeah, like let's tackle one by
There's a
one.
lot there. There's a lot to unpack. So like, to answer your like most imminent question that you just asked, I mean, are the centralized exchanges, there's two ways to look at it, right? Are they the biggest extractors, or are they just the most efficient and easiest use case? Do they have the best product out there? I mean, you could argue that it's the latter, because everyone still wants to use their app. Everyone
It could
still
be
is
both, right?
growing. It could
They know that
be both.
They know that they are the easiest to use.
Exactly. Yeah. And I don't think there's any difference between crypto centralized exchanges or any other Web2 product market where you have, the top dogs and you have the bottom dogs, right? So in my opinion, I think this plays out, or we've actually kind of like seeing certain trends play out. So let's look at the centralized exchanges, right? So you're saying a lot of people still use centralized exchanges. I think we need to zoom out, step back a bit, and ask ourselves, why are they using centralized exchanges? Okay, because they want to buy crypto. Why do they want to buy crypto? Well, if we're being honest with each other, they want to make money. They want to make money, right? Okay, and do they know all the tokens that they want to buy? No. So they go onto Coinbase because they see an article that Bitcoin is broken 100K, and they're like, damn, well, Bitcoin's so expensive, I can't afford a whole Bitcoin, but I should be able to buy some other coins, right? And then they go on and they see familiar names like XRP, Doge, Cardano, and they're like, oh, these are still so cheap. What if they get to the price of Bitcoin? So there's a lot of psychological stuff that go on, right? And so your point is like, well, exchanges will just own the entire moat, right? And on-chain is just too hard. It's just for power users. Well, there's one main reason why people will migrate to on-chain eventually, and that's because the long tail is typically where you can make the most returns, right? Or the most alpha can be seen there. That's number one reason. Number two is you're betting that eventually the liquidity volumes on-chain exchanges or DEXs will eventually match that of centralized exchanges. You're actually seeing that with a lot of the major assets already between Coinbase and, say, if you want to compare it to Uniswap, on Ethereum or across Base or whatever that might be. The DEX volumes on many days actually outpace centralized exchanges, right? So you can kind of see this kind of like trend.
Yeah, I want to push back there a little. I think the highest volume that we have seen in terms of ratio of DEX to centralized exchanges is around 1:5. So 21% has been the highest, so far.
Weren't there a few, at least, and I know I'm cherry picking data points there, but weren't there a few days or at least monthly DEX volume of last cycle at least, and maybe even this cycle where Uniswap outperformed Coinbase in terms
but
of,
if you if you take aggregate decentralized exchanges versus the centralized exchanges,
centralized wins.
It wins hands down. Like it's like 5x from
Correct.
at the best, right? And 10 to 15x when like regularly.
Yeah.
But you're right. I get that. Like on a daily basis, sometimes Uniswap has surpassed Coinbase.
Yeah. And the point I was making is definitely not that DEXs are a better experience and are beating centralized exchanges. It's more so that we're starting to see a shift or a trend towards, DEXs being viable or a viable option for people to use or for bigger institutions to potentially trade on. And I think one of the main reasons why we haven't seen continued kind of or more aggressive trend towards this is because these things are really hard to use, number one. And two, there's just so many assets. So to your point, like the curation has been terrible. It's been so bad, right? So then kind of like I'm trying to remember the first question you asked, which is kind of like, where does this end up? Like centralized, do these on-chain equivalents of exchanges with AI end up becoming like, the new extractors? I wouldn't describe them as extractors. I would just describe them as like a better user experience if they're able to achieve it, right? Because at the end of the day, who cares where I'm buying it from, right? Whether it's Coinbase, whether it's Moonshot, whether it's Phantom Wallet, I don't know. I just want to buy the thing and I want to make money, right? And my bet is it's not going to be an individual app. My bet is it's going to be a singular terminal that you interface with that's going to not only help you do the execution, but it's going to do the curation and it's going to be personalized as well, Sarab. It's going to know exactly the type of things you want to ape. It's going to know when you want to ape. It's like, oh, Sarab getting his salary payment. So I'm obviously using this hypothetically. Typically, he puts some stuff aside. So let me get the hottest picks for today or for the last week because I know what kind of data he wants to look at, right? So I think it's just going to end up with a better experience. And I think that's better for the market overall.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, it's like I should be able to give it like my risk tolerance, my goals, just like your financial advisor does, like outside of crypto. And then, suggest you a bunch of things and perhaps even execute on your behalf within the limits that it is allowed, right?
Correct. And there are a few agents that are running kind of like internally right now that are playing around with this and that can already do this. But to your point, this industry is still super early. And we haven't seen even similar things emerge from like the Web 2 agent world, right? So I do think it'll take a little bit of time to play out.
I recently spoke to Chris from Orbit, and I think he mentioned that they are working towards something similar.
Yeah.
Are there any more names that you know of? Can you share?
Yeah, I mean, like the Griffin guys can already run this internally in beta. Agent Tank ran a demo. I haven't played around with it, but I think it was a local demo where you can set guardrails on, specific websites that you navigate to or that you allow your agent to navigate to, and they can only trade within a spending limit and within certain market cap sizes of tokens on a given particular day that is, 5 days old or whatever that might be. So you can set all these different kind of limits up. The other kind of like much safer play that I've seen is like on protocols like Giza, right? Where these are all like, do you remember Yearn Finance where you could just like deposit and like earn off of stable coins and stuff? I feel like some of these agents are running back the same playbook, except like, it's an agentic workflow and all that kind of stuff. I don't know how much of this is like autonomous, if I'm being honest with you, but we're starting to see kind of like safe plays from there. Wayfinder, I actually have been dying to play around with Wayfinder. I don't know if you've been able to do so, but I've heard that they've been able to do pretty cool things as well.
I mean, I've already seen the Twitter videos and screenshots or whatever.
That's my biggest gripe, Sarab. Let me play around with these things, please.
As
I need to see whether these things actually work. Yeah.
I mean, we've been burnt way too many times by the demos and videos of applications, that horse. Every time something cool, which is not in the production, I see something like that. It quickly reminds me of that meme where, when you start, the horse is great and by the time, it's all terrible. Funny you should mention Yearn Finance. I think that was the first attempt at automation of any sort where yield aggregation was kind of automated for an end user.
Well, I would counter and I would say that SET protocol back in the day, they were the OGs. But Yearn Finance were the ones that like made it like way more popular. Yeah.
Right. But yeah, I mean, you had a few people who were designing strategies and you still relied on those people, right? I think that is why
Correct.
scale was an issue for Yearn Finance. And if an agent platform or an agent can take that form, I think that would be scalable to whatever users we have. But let's see if that happens. Okay, so if you were to build something like this from scratch with crazy, wild possibilities in your mind, what would that agent look like? What would be your personal go-to DeFi agent and how could they be like they push the boundaries of what is possible today?
Yeah. I mean, it's a boring answer, but I think it's the truth. And also the nuance happens in the execution of what I'm about to say, right? Which is it needs to be an agent that makes me money. I don't care anyone that says, oh, it needs to be able to handle stable coins and all this. No, no. People only come to crypto right now to make money. So you need to appeal to that particular use case. So it would be some kind of a trader agent. And in my opinion, and this is where like it's a hot take maybe, is people that come to crypto right now, and I'm just talking about right now, get dopamine hits from making a much larger amount of money over a shorter period of time than they expected. So I would argue that this agent needs to be able to trade on chain. That's typically where all those conditions are matched with, right? And so I think it should be an agent that is able to trade within a specific range bound. It can, maybe play around with a couple $100 to start off with. So it's definitely gaps that you don't end up losing, like, more than your net worth or more than you wanted to in the first place. And it's able to show you returns within like the first like couple of days, hours, or even like, minutes. Now, what I've just described is, of course, like the dream, right? It's what everyone wants to make. I think it's going to come down into the execution. I think right now, a lot of people have been kind of hesitant to launch a fully fledged product because they haven't really thought about it intricately, right? So like the earliest example that I can think of is AI16Z wanting to launch an autonomous trader, right? We haven't really seen it come into production. And I think like these guys are probably like one of the more advanced teams in terms of like the time that they've spent building this, but it still hasn't gone production live. And I think there's many reasons for that. Number one, it's such a hard problem to solve, right? There's also a lot of pressure on like that thing making money. If it doesn't make money, you lose the entire reputation of everything, right? And number three, it's like, okay, well, what do you trade? You need to like take inputs from like some of the best traders in the world and all that kind of stuff. But if I were to build something, it would be something along like a trader agent that actually ends up making you money. It would be on-chain specific and it would give you that dopamine hit of maybe playing with higher risk alts. Of course, it needs to come with the disclaimer that, you could lose potentially all your money, right? And so it would need to be kind of like capped in that way. So kind of like a degen trader bot, I think would be the one that I would think would do the best. And I actually have a proof point for that, right? Which is, and again, I keep mentioning this damn agent. The reason why I'm mentioning is because it's just like the easiest one that I can point to, which is this sports betting agent called Ask Billy Bets. I don't know if you've come across it at all, Saurabh. But this thing is like, it's got a higher win rate than like any average bettor by far, right? So it started off with 100K book and I think it's at like 150K right now, which is pretty insane, right? And I'm watching this and I'm like, why is this so appealing to me? A guy that like doesn't watch half the sports that it's betting on, right? That has no idea some of the parlays that it's doing. Why is this so fascinating to me? And I'm like, oh, it's because it connects to the real human world. It's because it's relevant. And it's because it speaks to humans or its community in a way that is relevant and that I feel is human. That's the AI XPT effect, right? It's like, why do I relate with AI XPT? It's because it sounds like me. It sounds like a crypto degen, right? And so there's this whole community and human aspect that I think often gets overlooked. Everyone's like, hey, if I get an agent that just like trades and shows graphs, that's going to be cool. It's going to make me so much money. Yeah, maybe for like power users, but for like a wider audience of social people, probably not.
No.
So, yeah.
All right. So follow-up question, right? I want to take your trader agent and scale it, right? Let's say that everyone has access to your trader that is making money, right? The question is like money is made in markets by exploiting inefficiencies, right? Whether that is you have some information that others don't or whatever, right?
For sure.
When everybody has access to this trader, does the trader end up making money?
No. That's why I don't think everyone should have access to it. I think well, hear me out, right? I think any kind of strategy that is open source is just obviously going to get arbitrage. Like, that's not going to make it, right? It has to be proprietary. Why is Ask Billy Bets the most, again, I keep using this agent as an example. Why is it so successful? It's because it doesn't like lay out its bets until 10 minutes before the game starts, right? So it's already placed its bets before, right? Now, of course, the crypto answer would be, hey, let everyone get access to it. And I don't agree with that business model. And maybe that's because I have I don't know, a Web 2 background. Maybe it's because I'm secretly
No,
a
it just can't work. You're right.
It
You're
just
right. It
can't
can't
work,
work.
dude, right?
Yeah.
And so if you wanted to take it a step further, you could be like, okay, fine. Eventually, when ZK encryption is able to be scaled, you can encrypt everyone's bets. So therefore, you know that everyone gets access to a certain thing, but that it wasn't shared before and everyone feels good. But at the end of the day, Sarab, it needs to have some kind of tiered access. Otherwise, you end up creating a savings account, and that's a completely different use case. And maybe you can do that, right? A higher savings account sounds great. Everyone gets access to it, but a lower APY, you can't get the high APY and everyone gets access to it. It just doesn't work. It's not market efficient at all. Yeah.
I think that's fair because it's just first principles, right? If everyone is doing the same thing, you're not going to make money. I mean, you need to be in the minority of a trade or whatever investment thesis that you have to in order to make money, which is
Correct.
I think. Yeah. So far, I mean, beyond DeFi or anything else, where do you think that the whole AI stack has not exploited a particular opportunity? Or what would you like the AI agents or marketplaces or anything that is to do or to solve a problem that is currently being kind of ignored by them?
Yeah, it's a good question. I spend quite a bit of time thinking about this. So I'll give you my boring, unsexy answer first, which is there's a lot of back end stuff that I think needs addressing, right? Which is like, hey, I need data for this model. Go grab me data, right? But then you need to do a ton of other tasks to it. You need to clean it. You need to label it. You need to structure it. I think all of that shit can get automated in a way, right? And I think agents will be the smarter employee to do all of this. Like all this kind of mechanical Turk, Sarab, I think can be done by an agent effectively. So whether it's data aggregation in the example that I just used, whether it's managing liquidity pools on Uniswap for certain positions for certain hedge fund managers or liquidity providers, or whatever that might be, I think there's a realm for a lot of these unsexy agents to do well. It's kind of like a gig economy of like unsexy agents that I think will be really useful. And then the other thing that I think would be kind of interesting for me, and that again, I'm still trying to figure out like how exactly it materializes is I'll ask you this. What's one thing that these crypto agents will have in common with, like Web 2 use cases, for example?
Are they easy to use? I don't know.
Right, exactly. You can go through the same terminal. That's the
Right.
whole point, right?
Right.
Like it looks like ChatGPT and it does all the things ChatGPT does today, but I can also do some crypto stuff. That's pretty cool.
I'm not getting
right?
outside of that app. I'm not leaving that app ever.
Exactly, right? So now what I'm thinking of is, what Web 2 things can we integrate into the same crypto product that will then tie in users to use more of the crypto stuff, right? My guess is some kind of a finance app that I can pull up on my phone, right? That earns me yield or something like that,
Yep.
I don't know what the US equivalent of those things are, but like something like that. And then it does other crypto native stuff for me, right? And ironically, Coinbase or other centralized exchanges are the furthest along with this, right? Like when I was at Coinbase, I was helping build out their like DeFi yield product, which allowed people to earn APY on their assets, right? What happens when Robinhood, who allows you to already do that on certain stocks, allows you to now do that with crypto assets? I think we're going to see a merge of different things here. And I think there's an opportunity for agents to kind of like capture that crossover. Yeah.
Right. Makes sense. And the reason why I asked you this question was I was talking to Shaw last week on the podcast, and he was telling me that governance is in crypto in general can be streamlined using AI agents, right? And he was mentioning that they are building this particular agent using their own infrastructure, which is also a good strategy, by the way. I mean, if you can dog food your infrastructure, I think nothing more like it, right? I mean, to show what it can do and how things can be built. So yeah, I mean, that was my motivation.
Yeah, I mean, Shaw's been saying this from the start, right? Which is like, it should just make the UX of using crypto way, way easier. And it's a simple but very powerful statement.
Yeah, and it's difficult to execute because just there are so many things that need to be brought under, as you said, one application, and it needs to look clean, right? Because you can't throw too many things at a user in the first go and scare them away.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's forcing crypto to do something that they've never done before, dude, which is like build like a really good product. Like it's good. It's like forcing people to actually think from first principles. What do the user want? Not I got to create this L2 and it has to have 1 million transactions per second. No, like what is the thing? Why are they using the transactions in the first place?
I'm hopeful that the current state of the market forces
Yeah,
at least a few such applications.
it will.
Yeah, I mean, those are the only, I mean, there are benefits to prices going down, forces you to pay attention to certain things that can work. And I just hope that it happens this time. And, we don't go back to launching agents that do the same thing and meme coins that do nothing or whatever. But yeah, I think like I was going through your Twitter to prep for the episode, right? And you've, I think, mentioned once or multiple times that AI will bring more capital on chain because
Yep.
I think that is one of the most important things that we would want as an industry is to grow the pie. And nothing like growing a pie than helping create another way through which liquidity flows in. So just walk us through how that happens, who does that, how AI plays a part.
Yeah. So most people probably won't like this answer, but it's going to start off with the Web2 institutions. They have the moat of users to start off with. So I think, and these don't happen sequentially, it happens at the same time, what I'm about to describe, right? So firstly, all the attention is happening with the Web2 stuff, right? Why? Because they have a higher trust, higher reputation, ranking, and people already have accounts there, right? So they're like, oh, right, I'll just go on Coinbase and use their agent, or I'll just navigate or let them tell me what to do. And, I'll trust them, right? The second thing that's going to happen in parallel is I think we're finally going to see some of the most useful crypto apps emerge, startup. And I think it'll come in the form of agents. And a lot of people think I'm crazy because I'm just like, I keep saying this word, agents, agents, agents. And you are right to call me crazy. But when I look over the fence into the Web2 AI world, I see a ton of these things pop up. And guess what? They're actually generating revenue and they're actually making meaningful impact on everyone's lives, right? And it's in boring things, right? It's in
Could you give me examples?
yeah. There's like an agent that I was looking at yesterday. I couldn't play around with this because it was a supply chain agent, right? For shipping specifically. And there have been many teams that have tried to like just make this entire shipping kind of like thing really simple and easy to use. And the reason why there's so much abstraction and challenge there is because there's a lot of human interaction, right? There's a lot of paperwork and stuff like that. And you had this agent which basically was designed to interact with humans only digitally. So remember, I just said there's a lot of human interaction that needs to happen, right? But what happens if this interaction was just online, like, using text or an automated call that you could speak to someone, right? And they could speak back to you and they sound like, like ChatGPT in voice mode, right? Have you ever used that? Like for me, I can speak to that guy all day, right? Because his tone changes when he is describing something. Anyway, so I watched this entire like agent demo where it just basically ran through the entire supply chain of all the different intermediaries and it did it within a day versus the week or 2 weeks that it typically takes. And the reason why it was able to do that was because it was already plugged into calendars, slots, and everything where it was able to just book, call the relevant person and act within its own realm, right? A kind of like an agent intern that ran within this like supply chain situation, right? And that already saved the company a bunch of money and actually ended up being able to take on like more customers within that demo. And that demo period ran between like, I think like a couple of months or whatever that might be. I must stress that this was something that I saw on X. So it might just all be misinformation completely. So I don't know, but that was the most exciting one that I kind of saw recently, right? And so there's a lot of agents that I think are going to be making impact, particularly within the enterprise realm as well on the Web2 side of things. So what I'm seeing is there's a few agents that are helping, and software engineers hate this, but like assist software engineers, check relevant code to make sure, it's written in a certain format or way, or, check whether they could add certain things to it or suggest certain things to it. So it's kind of like a coding co-pilot, right? And there's a bunch of these things that exist on things like LangChain or AutoGen, which are some of the Web 2 agent frameworks that exist out there, right? Not Web 3. So I see this kind of like happening on the Web 2 world, and I'm like, I do think there'll be spillover or a lot of similarities that appear on the Web 3 world simply because there's nothing novel in how that technology is being used here, which couldn't explain why it couldn't be used on the Web 3 world as well. So, I forgot what the original question was, Harab, but that's kind of like how I see it playing out. Yeah.
All right. Have you also seen, I mean, this is about supply chain. I mean, is there anything more where you've seen something like this and seems like, okay, there can be a product market fit here?
For what specifically?
No, for agents and, like you talked about the supply chain stuff, right? I mean, it is solving a
Yes.
real use case. It's bringing in more efficiencies for the system, right? Was there anything that you've looked at that is using a Web2 stack and, kind of helping either, I don't know, whether it is in your workflows or helping companies in any way, basically,
Aside from the supply chain example?
aside from the supply chain example? Yeah.
Yeah, so it was the enterprise stack that I was mentioning earlier, right? Which is like, okay, so one thing that I've seen kind of like play out is, okay, you have this agent that is able to make the whole strategy, so end-to-end product process a lot more efficient. And this doesn't mean that there's an agent that's creating the product and running all the meetings and stuff like that, but it's an agent that exists on your own internal company database that can help things such as Scrum meetings, certain Slack messages for appointers, keep track of certain employees on certain kind of like work schedules, like Jira tickets and all that kind of stuff. Basically, making all of this stuff a lot more efficient, trained on company specific data. And it makes sense, right? Because like you need specific data to make sure that your AI agent kind of acts effectively. Now, how much revenue that actually leads to, I don't know, because a lot of those company things are kind of internal. I'm hoping that becomes public soon, but those are kind of like the less sexy but important things that I think we'll start to see first. It'll be a lot of knowledge work that gets optimized first, in my opinion. Yeah.
All right. That's fair. Yeah. And like you've been probably in this meta right since the start or probably even earlier. I'm not sure. But like, is there a blind spot currently with people, like as far as outsiders are concerned? Are there blind spots that they are not at all thinking about in terms of capabilities of AI or agents and what they can do for these people?
Blind spots in terms of how they can help or what
How they can help.
both
Actually.
yeah.
Both.
Yeah, I mean, I think about the challenges a lot and I think about it in context of myself. So I think I have a ton of blind spots and I'm constantly trying to find those blind spots and then like fix them or learn them or do the best that I can. And so I think data is one that we've actually mentioned a few of the challenges. So I'll just quickly run over them and then move on to the second part. Data, I don't think is something that we've solved. Right? Okay, you can have all the fancy model ownership, all the fancy apps in the world, but like you need important data to be able to make these things like really that much better than the Web2 alternatives, the Web2 social media apps and all that kind of stuff, the Web2 chat GPTs that already know enough, right? Now, the pessimistic view is, oh, we're never going to get that data. It's going to be useless. The optimistic view is if I create a good enough app that people want to talk to, right? Like a chat GPT, but for crypto and maybe a bit of Web2 as well, people are going to just end up giving me that data anyway, right? Because they're talking to it, just like I'm talking to you, right?
Right.
So I can build up a profile of an individual just right now from the start. And that should be enough of a leverage for me to kind of like, build out a useful product from that. So maybe it is as simple as that, right? So that's on the data side. The other side of things is just like the UX is just terrible to use, right? And so I kind of wonder like, will this improve or will we add too many intermediaries that it still won't be good enough to use, right? And that's like the point that we're trying to like kind of like figure out. We've proven that it works in terms of like stablecoin transfers and all that kind of stuff. Like it's good enough, it's better. People are increasingly adopting stablecoins. The US is now super pro stablecoin. We'll see where that runs, but those are kind of like the challenges. The opportunities that I don't think that hasn't been looked at right now, there's a few which, again, get people very riled up, but I think should be focused on, within a certain extent, which is the social side of things, which is, okay, right now you have a bunch of crypto degens from siloed communities talking about their token, talking about that coin, right? But I wonder how you combine a bunch of these users so that they become multi-chain users, right? And the reason why I'm making this point is agents won't care what chain they act on. They're not going to be chain specific. They're going to be chain agnostic. So there's a cultural evolution that needs to happen within the crypto community specifically. I actually think it'll be easier to get non-crypto people to use these new crypto AI apps versus encouraging the crypto people to use the crypto AI apps, right? Because they're so tribalistic. And I think that's just going to be a painful evolution that we need to kind of like figure out, over time. So yeah, I think those examples probably are like top of mind right now.
Agents should be interoperable,
Yeah.
right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, think about it, right? Like we saw virtuals that launched on Base, launched on Solana, and everyone on Base was crying. And it's like, well, hang on a second. Like you want these agents to work across both chains. You have a bigger total addressable market. You want that to happen. But, people are just like, they're thinking too small.
Growing the pie is not allowed in crypto, Ejaaz.
Yeah, it's ironic. We talk about growing the pie, but no one actually wants to grow the pie.
Yeah, but in that, I think I tried Hey and on to
Yeah.
use, to swap token from one chain to another.
What do you
And it was quite all right at that. I didn't have to tell it what bridge or whatever, and it was all right. I mean, it took longer, but it was fine. It did the
Yes.
job for me. Yeah.
Yes. And I think that'll get quicker over time, right?
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
think about someone who isn't you, Sarab, who doesn't know, oh, I could just click this and do it myself. They'll be like, oh, this is much better. I couldn't do this on Coinbase. You know what I mean? This is much better, right? Now it just needs to get quicker. Once it can happen in like a fraction of a second, you have a better product.
I mean, boring but correct. I think analogy is to use the internet. I don't need to know TCP/IP, right?
Exactly.
I don't care.
Correct.
I shouldn't know chains and bridges and any of it.
Well, you know the saying, we're so early. We are actually too early. And it's preventing us from building good products. Yeah.
To be honest, like looking at CT, that changes based on the price, right?
Yes.
Whether we are too early or it is too late.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, let's move on to Aiccelerate DAO. Tell us what has happened until now. What does the roadmap look like? And what is your like moonshot hope for the DAO?
Yeah, sure. So, for context for those listening, myself, this guy called Marcus, and Roperito, who is one of the head engineers at Noose Research, we kind of like got together and we were like, okay, we're getting a lot of inbound from builders in the space, ecosystem participants or contributors to different kind of like agent ecosystems coming to us and saying, hey, like, could you help, maybe fund this team? Or, hey, we're seeing this kind of like gap in the market and we think we should build A, B, and C for it. And there's only so much that like Rope, Marcus, and I can do individually. So we were like, hey, I wonder if we can scale this out into like a larger community and do something pretty cool here. So we decided to form this DAO called, I just call it Aiccelerate DAO. Some call it AI Accelerate, but I just call it Aiccelerate DAO. And its focus is basically to build out this entire crypto AI ecosystem in as decentralized a fashion as makes sense, right? And so we launched this DAO and it had a pretty spicy start. Marcus Rope and I made the fumble of assuming that, this would go kind of like under the radar. We were like, oh, it's on a bear market day. No one will care about this. It's great. We can kind of like start small and then kind of build slowly, slowly, slowly. And it just had a crazy launch. It went to an absurd market cap, which wasn't justified at all for the time being. And, we got a lot of flack and hate from that, which was, in my opinion, justified to an extent because, we hadn't added vesting and obviously we've retroactively gone back and we've added that, but the deed was out there at that point, right? And I don't want to hop too much on about that. So in terms of like what we want to do with the DAO, there's three things. Number one, we have an internal core developer team, which is building out along a product roadmap, which we have designed. And by we, we're talking about Mark, Roperito, and I, right? The core contributors right now. And that roadmap is very much focused on building out things that plug gaps that we see currently in the industry. So this could be ecosystem tooling. This could be agents themselves. This could also be frameworks that we think meet a different bar that hasn't been satisfied by other agent frameworks right now. I think what we publicly released on our roadmap, I think it's pinned at the top of our official account, is we're releasing 2 agents soon. We've currently been behind the scenes working on that for about a month right now, or about a month and a half. And we're really excited to where it's getting. But, we're going to internally test it first, which we have been doing, and then we're going to release it publicly. So there's 2 agents. One is going to be a research-focused agent. The other is going to be that trader type agent that I mentioned earlier to you, Sarab, that I kind of want to see kind of like out in the world doing things, right? And then there are certain tools that come with that I think would be useful for builders specifically. So that's one kind of bucket. The second bucket is an incubator. So the reason why we wanted to set up an incubator is we see all these teams that we want to work with, but we don't have the means to kind of like scale that. We also equally have a bunch of really passionate individuals within our own network, within our advisor group that want to help these teams build something really cool. I mean, the number of times I've come across a really great builder that just doesn't have the resources has been like too many times. So I want to be able to facilitate and foster those kind of builders to do something cool. So we're building out an accelerator, which should be live soon, which will basically take a very small cohort to start off with and run it on a 2-month sprint. So by the end of those 2 months, you should have something that is not only demoable, but accessible to the public to use within a certain, beta testing group. and, it'll be open for investment at that point, right? Similar to like a Y Combinator model, if you like. And then the third bucket is something that we're working on because we would need to set up the legal infrastructure and everything, but it will allow us to invest in teams that we have really high conviction in, right? So whether that is in tokens specifically or other such vehicles, like we're trying to work out a way that we can do that. And the reason why we think all these three buckets is super important is, in our opinion, it's the number one way to build out this ecosystem. You need to invest in the space, but you also need to build yourself and also partner with and build with other teams. That's via the accelerator. Partnerships that we've announced officially to date have been with Virtuals and with Send AI. So there's some really cool things in the pipeline that we're going to announce over the next, hopefully, couple of weeks that we're really excited by, but I can't mention right now on this episode. But the point of all these partnerships is it's going to allow us to scale those three buckets. Yeah.
All right, fair. Yeah, and like, what is your moonshot hope for the Accelerate DAO?
My moonshot hope is we build one of the best applications or agents that are used by like the majority of people in crypto. And I actually really believe that we have the capability to do that. And the reason why I have so much conviction is between the three of us and a bunch of our DAO members right now that we have in our internal Discord, which we're going to make like public soon. There's just so many ideas and so much talent between that network that I fully believe we can do something cool. There's a lot of experience there. Yeah.
All right, and the problems that we talked about, right, in terms of sustainability, in terms of value accrual, how do you think of
Yes.
those for the DAO?
Yeah. So I think create a really valuable service and charge it like a Web2 model. So that could be subscriptions, that could be a one-off payment, annual payment, whatever that might be. And the reason why I say that is I think the number one important thing is to onboard not just crypto users, but non-crypto users as well. So you need to give them something they're very familiar with, rather, right? So that's the onboarding thing. I think once you've onboarded a ton of users, then their data, their user interactions, you can do a lot more powerful things with that. Okay, then the critique I get with that suggestion is, what's crypto about it, right? Well, the crypto side of things is what you do with the revenue that you get is completely up to you, right? You can
Right.
buy back and burn, you could put it in a treasury, you can get the DAO to vote on how you spend that treasury, just like a shareholder meeting or whatever that might be. You can do a bunch of those things. But I think keeping the front end very Web2 is way more important than people expect. Yeah.
Fair. Yeah, and I know that, like, if I was to ask you about if you were to do a do-over, what would you do differently? I think forget about the token bit, right? I mean, I think you would have added vesting or whatever at the beginning itself if you were to do
100%.
it again. That aside, for a builder or a founder who's trying to think of building agents or whatever within the stack, is there any learnings or anything that you could have done differently? Can you share something of that along those lines?
For sure, yeah. So aside from the vesting thing, what I would do differently is I would take more time, include more people in that opening round. Now, a lot of people are like, okay, well, this is kind of like a cabal situation. The reality was that, and I mentioned this in my kind of post-mortem tweet after all of this went down, was that we were just so swept up in the excitement of everything that we just wanted to get this out there. I also don't know how much it would have worked if we just did a fully open launch, because it would have just got sniped, and the people that would have ended up holding it would have been, non-believers and probably would have dumped the token anyway. I don't know, right? We've seen it with a bunch of pump fund launches and all that kind of stuff. So I think somewhere in between was where I was targeting, and it was too concentrated. I think we should have spent a little more time kind of like building out for a wider audience. That being said, I don't know whether there is a perfect way to launch a token. It depends on many things, which is like market conditions and who gets, access to these things, how much they can buy. But no one can kind of like judge in these open markets what kind of market cap it goes to, right? If AICC went to like a 20 million market cap, no one would care. No, everyone would be like, cool, right? But it's because it was so hyped up that it just got sent, and, there was a bunch of issues around that. And then number two, I think something that's important is to have something viable, ready to go right from the off. The way we were thinking about it is, okay, let's start this DAO and then work with a really small group of DAO members to build this thing out, right? Grassroots. But I think because of the way it was launched and because of how much hype it got, people were expecting a product tomorrow. And in reality, like, we want to take our time to build this thing. I think it's super important to take your time to build something really important, right? And then number three is, I think, when you describe something as a DAO, a lot of people have a certain understanding of what that word means, right? Which is like anyone and everyone can vote on this thing and, decide the direction of where it goes. And I don't necessarily believe that's true from day one of that DAO. I think eventually it's super important, but I think from day one, I think it's super important to kind of like have a focused team that's super passionate about it, typically the founding core contributors, to guide the direction of that DAO. Yeah. So I think making that clear would have been important.
Yeah, fair. All right. So most of the tokens are, I don't know, 70 to 90, 95% down, most of the AI tokens, right?
Yeah.
Like, given that, which are the teams that you are still excited by? That, okay, these are the guys who are actually building, regardless of what the enthusiasm of the market looks like, and which are these like areas that they are operating in?
Yeah, I think I want to avoid like being described as like a shell for certain things because like the teams that I mentioned now could change like next week. But I will talk about sectors that I'm super passionate about, right? The number one sector that I'm excited about are these agent platforms. And the reason why I'm so excited about them is I don't think they're going to just be launch platforms. I think they're going to enable this thing called what I'm calling the agent app layer or the services layer, which I think, you're talking about revenue models earlier, Sarab, I think, which is where most of the revenue is going to get made, right? So I don't know how you want to describe this in the Web 2 world. Maybe it's like a Zapier for
Right.
agent services. But the way I think about it is, okay, you have this launch platform, which allows you to create an agent and a token. But realistically, you need these agents to be really useful. And how do you make these agents useful? Well, you can design it custom on your own way, plug in APIs, all that kind of stuff, but it's very tiresome. What if they could tap into a layer which allows it to get whatever service or function that it needs? It could even engage with another agent. I think that to me is a very useful moat. And I see a bunch of these platforms that are already created and are going to be created thinking along these lines, right? And with that, in conjunction, comes this whole idea of like swarms right now. Now, I have the number one criticism for agent swarms, which is like, why do you need a swarm? Can't you just run it in a singular instance?
Hmm.
And the answer is in most of those cases, yeah. But reality, many people are building agents for specific niches and verticals. So you're going to end up with a bunch of agents, whether you like it or not, that do better service than you, whether you like it or not, right? So these agents are going to have to talk to each other eventually. And I think figuring out how those agents interface with each other is going to be super exciting. So I'm excited about those two things. On the agent side of things, I really want to see some of these application agents like kill it, right? So I think we're going to see an agent somewhere in the DeFi AI world, whether it's like a sports betting agent or a trading agent, actually end up doing really, really well and outperforming the market. I think it's going to be under proprietary trading algorithms. I don't think it's going to be public, and that's completely fine. But I think it's going to be enough to get people kind of going. And then the third thing that I'm really excited about is the unsexy part that I started this entire episode with, which is the resources side of things. I actually think some of these DePIN networks, specifically compute and training, are going to get really, really powerful. If you look at like what Noose and Prime Intellect and now Jensen recently just announced are working on, they're very, very early. But if you can actually create a network that people can have ownership in, that train AI models to like a really good like specification, that's friggin' awesome,
Right.
in
Right.
my opinion. Yeah.
I think funny that you mentioned why should there be multiple agents, and this is my thinking. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So I think when I was writing the DeFi AI article, I talked about how hedge funds have different teams, right? I mean, one would be doing research, one would be doing simple trade, literally the trade execution. One would be, kind of monitoring the risk, whatever, like risk team. And there does need to be these separate teams because they are very, very specialized. But only when all of these work together, they can make a hedge fund like successful, right? It should be a very well-oiled machinery. So does it matter that whoever is building agent has that kind of nuance in that field, right? And it is difficult for a one person or a one team
To do it all.
to do it all by themselves.
Agreed. Agreed. I mean, the most obvious data point is humanity's market, right? Like, we're all specialized in doing certain things, you know? Yeah, I agree.
And there's a reason why AIXPT is not doing everything together, right?
Correct.
And so I just feel that eventually that was what it will be.
I agree with you. It's the conclusion I've also reached, and I used to be a swarm hater.
All right, Ejaaz. Is there anything else that you want to end this with? Any advice, anything that you want to share? Something that I might have missed out on? I don't know.
No, I don't think you've been very thorough. All I would say is what I say to a lot of people at times like this when the markets are down is study and don't give up. I think a lot of the alpha, whether it's investment alpha that you're looking for or just, a chance to satisfy your curiosity, which is like what I try and do a lot of the time, is there during down markets. And put it this way, if it is all bullshit, you'll find out the same way. So you would rather study and figure it out now so that you can spend your time doing other stuff. And all I will say is my head has been down studying and I still haven't come up for air. So there's a lot to learn. Keep studying.
Thanks a lot, Ejaaz. Thanks for spending the time.
Always. Thanks for having me.